the DORK podcast with Rich Keefe. It's the DORK podcast. Keefe Davey. It's the DORK podcast. Hashtag. It's the hashtag DORK podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to a very special YouTube-only edition of Hashtag Dork. My name is Rich Keefe, joined as always by Davey Eyeballs. He is promo code Ron Von D. All hail the king of ginger ale. It's Ryan Davey. Davey, how are you?
Having a night. Can't wait to talk to these two lamos. I'm excited.
Well, come on. How dare you besmirch our great guests? It is the host from the TLDR podcast. It is Nick Friar and Dr. Joe. Gentlemen, how are you this evening?
I am doing great, except for this stupid bug in my house. But we go from the kings of Comic-Con today to the bad boys of Comic-Con. Couldn't be a better day for Joe and I.
Just chopping back a fat dart.
You guys today had a chance to speak with Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, two of the all-time legends. So that is a thrill. Looking forward to listening to that. That is available. By the time people are watching this, that'll be available. You guys can plug that at the end, tell people where to find it. But I know I'm very excited. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some Scott Snyder on this very list. Ooh. So before we get into our top 10, and it's very similar to the top 10 Batman comic books that we did, we all came up with a list of 10. Then I combined them up and did the math on it, did the tiebreakers, did all of that. And we have a nice list of 10. We have a whole bunch of honorable mentions to get to as well. But let's go around real quick. And Davey, when you hear the term horror comic book, what is it that applies, or what would make it a horror comic book to you?
So there'd have to be some sort of macabre, right? There'd have to be some sort of like horror elements to it. There, I'm thinking like monsters or some sort of supernatural or psychological thing to it. There is a bit of a gray area though here.
Yes.
And we went back and forth, and this isn't I'm looking at the list right now. So it's not on. So there's a lot of like Batman comics that could have been considered for this, but since it's Batman, I think we left them all off the list. But like Spawn absolutely has horror elements to it.
Sure.
But
I love Spawn. That's a great call.
But I would be. But again, I mean, that's kind of like an anti-hero comic as opposed to horror. So I don't know. Let's throw it out there. What do you guys think?
I mean, I'm a pussy, so pardon my French, but anything where I have to read in the day, I considered, horror. Like, because when I read it at night, if it like keeps me up all goddamn night, but I, along the same lines, anything that's, got a lot of bloodshed in it, that's a bit gory, or it's dealing with more of the supernatural things, for me. And so like when I picked horror books, I picked something that was more story driven and more character driven versus like, I mean, there were some Batman books I did consider, Last Night on Earth, Batman Who Laughs, some of those other Batman stories where there's horror imagery, but I didn't consider them a horror story, if that makes sense.
So I need something that makes me say a couple times like, oh, fuck, in the course of all this. Like if I'm not getting an oh, fuck out of this, then it's like, then I'm not really getting that scared. And there's one book in particular that has like jarring images and a lot of viciousness that's high up on our list, and it is still on my list, but that kind of falls under that category where it's like, yeah, it's kind of scary, but like some of this other shit's like straight nightmare fuel. Yeah. And like I bust Joe's chops for being scared shitless of some of this stuff, but it's like, I read some of these things like, that were like one story arcs fairly recently. I'm like, I don't think I can read all this fucking shit at night.
Yeah, no, that's definitely one way of looking at it. I looked at it with the way we did our horror movies, top 50 last year too, where there's a lot of like, personal opinion on that. So some we would get in an argument like, it's a thriller, it's a horror thriller. Like, all right, well, whatever it is to you. And I think that test of kind of either reading it by yourself or just thinking about it after the fact and being like, oh, that was pretty scary. Like that's me. And sometimes it might just be the art. Like there's one book that I don't think made the list overall, but it was on my list that was pretty high, and it was more so because of the art. And so we can get into that. I say we dive in. We'll do 10 through 2, and then we'll rip off some of our honorable mentions, and then we'll crown number 1. And it's a pretty interesting list too. And again, with 4 people voting on it, I think it covers a lot. There are a couple of old-timey classics that we didn't have on there that I think other lists may have. This might be a little bit more new-aged, a lot of newer books on there, recency bias, etc. But let's dive in right now at number 10. And Friar, you go ahead and give this one out.
So this one was my absolute number one with a bullet, and this is the first book I ever talked about on TLDR, the very first episode. John Constantine, Hellblazer, City of Demons by Cy Spencer, not Cy Spurrier,
I know.
and Sean Murphy. Of course, this is Vertigo Comics, which is, of course, it was a DC imprint. Sean Murphy is one of my absolute favorite comic book creators, period. He's done a lot more writing over the past few years and love his stuff. But this was really... I don't know if this was my first exposure to him, but either way, I love this book. And this is the book, like, I have two books that I say to everybody, you should read this. Like, if you're interested in trying comics out, read this, because obviously we all know Constantine is a real bastard, right? So we get a little bit of that in this. This is a standalone series. It's only 5 issues, so it's really easy to consume, and it's pretty fast-paced throughout the majority of it. And I don't necessarily think this is the absolute scariest thing on here, but there is a real, like, fuck it, shit at the end of this series. And I'm like, geez, I did not see that coming. And there's, like, Sean Murphy's art is pretty jarring too. I know The Wake is something that could have been up for consideration here as well. That's a book between him and Scott Snyder. I didn't put that on my list because it was only, half horror, and the rest is like this futuristic thing. But just a quick little synopsis for everybody. When John Constantine is run over by a truck, it takes a little while for England's nicotine-fueled Magus to realize that he's perched between life and death. After a few weeks of hospital rehab, Constantine finds the London streets very different from when he left behind. A series of occult murders and mutilations demands his attention.
Yeah, I would say Constantine, Swamp Thing, Justice League Dark, it all kind of applies. Like, it's definitely all very horror themed. And I'm glad we had a Constantine book on there, because you definitely could have gone, like, some of the really dense Hellblazer stuff, like the Garth Ennis stuff is good, but it's kind of hard to pay. Like, it's just so much of it.
There's so much. Yeah, he just needed to be represented on this list. He's one of the best horror characters of all time. One of my absolute favorite comic book characters, like top 5 easy in my mind. He might be top 3.
Yeah,
same. And the other thing too, that if you wanted to see this in another format too, Friar and I know you and I have talked about on the side. This is one of the better DC animated movies. You can watch it on HBO Max right now. It's still you get something lost in the artwork of DC's animation, but the story is still there, and the story is phenomenal. So if you check out City of Demons on HBO Max too,
couldn't recommend both more.
Yep.
Awesome.
I got to read this, and it might be a lot higher had I read it. It was only on Friar's list, and like he said, he had it number 1.
Joe, wasn't on your list?
I bumped it for the book that's going to be number 6 on the list.
And I think it was an honorable mention for me.
It was an honorable mention. It just, because I was like, oh shit, I forgot I got to put this book on there. Something's got to go. And I'm not as attached to Constantine as you are. Like, when I read this book for the first trade on TLDR, I mean, I absolutely loved it, but that was really the only Constantine I've ever read. So I had so many good books I wanted to put on this list. But I mean, it made the honorable mention, so it definitely made an impact.
Hey, breaking news. Today's episode of TLDR was the last one. We're going out on a high note.
All right, Davey, number 9.
Number 9. So I am a huge fan of kind of like offbeat vampire tales. We'll talk about that later in the episode. But I mean, I think of movies like Let the Right One In, and like other vampire movies of that. What was the other one? Crossland or Stakeland, which is another one.
The Night Flyer.
Night Flyer. I didn't want to mention it. Someone else, but you did. And one of the best horror comics I've ever read is 30 Days of Night, which was, I have it right here. It was written by Steve Niles and Ben Templesmith and other people. They were the people who created it. And it tells the story of vampires who travel to Barrow, Alaska, where it's night for an entire month. And it's one of those stories where you're like, fuck, why didn't I think of that? Like that's a perfect, of course vampires would go to Alaska and feed for an entire month. Like, and what a horrifying thing to have like this like little snowed in town that you can't leave, that's just completely infested with vampires. The movie with Josh Hartnett, also good. One of my favorite vampire movies, other than The Night Flyer.
Right.
But I love, one of the things I really like too is that in the movie and in the comics, like vampires have like their own language. And in the movie, actually, it's horrifying. It's like a series of like hisses and like weird sounds. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
But just a really cool vampire versus a town, kind of like, it's kind of got like a Seven Samurai vibe to it too. So if you guys are into vampire stories and creative ones at that, 30 Days of Night is awesome.
So when did this come out? Because this completely escaped me. I'm gonna have to hoopla the shit out of this.
This came
it's
out
on Hoopla too, Joe. And make
Gotta be.
sure this is one of those stories where there's like a million kind of like spin-offs and a billion
Yeah.
like, oh, they took it from here. But the original book, like the one that the movie was inspired off of, what is it, like 3 or 4 issues, Davey? It's a quick read.
It's a quick read, and it came out in 2002.
Oh wow, yeah. So I wasn't even reading. I was on a big comic break at that point. I had stopped reading, so no wonder why it eluded me. But that premise is absolutely fantastic. Like, yeah, why hasn't like anyone else thought of this? Because it's the absolute perfect thing.
Yep.
So that one was number 4 on Davey's list. It was number 7 on mine, and ended up being number 9 here. So number 8, let's go to Doc.
So this book is an absolute barn burner, and so so number 8 is Philadelphia, written by Rodney Barnes. The artist, which the art in this book is out of bounds. It's Jason Son Alexander. Colors are by Lewis NCT, and the letterer is Marshall Dillon. And so I remember when this book first came out. I mean, I was immediately hooked from the first issue, and I tell everyone who I know that reads comics, if you haven't read this book, go out and read it. And Nick and I just recently, talked to Rodney, which that will drop sometime soon, because he's got a spin-off of this book called Nina Hawes
nice.
Nightmare Blog.
It's better. I think it's better. Yep.
Really?
Even
Nuts.
better, like paranormal, detective type shit,
Okay.
set in this world. So, when a small town beat cop comes home to bury his murdered father, a revered Philadelphia detective, James Sangster Sr., he begins to unravel a mystery that leads him down a path of horrors that will shake his beliefs to their very core. So this is a vampire book, and it's a bit of historical fiction as well, because the main vampire that you're introduced to right from the rip is the second president of the United States, John Adams.
Masters its own.
That's right.
And the evolution of him is, you get from when he first becomes infected as a vampire to where we are current day. That in itself is a rad story. And then all the his plan to take over the world and all the side characters you meet. There's some fucked up characters in this, and his menace like Toppy and the one with the mask there, Friar. Jupiter.
Yes, Jupiter's so fucked up.
They're so fucked up, but when you get to parts of their stories, you actually kind of root for them a bit, and I think that's part of the things that makes this vicious, ferocious vampire story so enthralling is the characters themselves.
And Joe, I'm taking notes right now. I haven't read this title yet, but is Abraham Lincoln in fact a vampire hunter in this?
No, and I think Ronnie actually mentioned
not that we know of.
He's not. Okay, thank you.
Yes, because we do see a second dead president a little bit later on, Davey. Not to spoil anything for you, we won't tell you who it is, but there are at least 2 dead presidents that pop up in this. In Jupiter.
So if we can nail down whether or not Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter is canon, then we should probably do that.
I'm disappointed in ourselves, Joe. We haven't asked Rodney that yet.
I know. I thought he mentioned something like that, but I mean,
that would have been the first question I asked him.
Right.
So in your world,
Fucking morons.
Come back.
But
Embarrassing.
This is one of those horror stories where it's vampires, and I mean, enough cannot be said about the art, because in comics, like, if you can have a really good story, you can have really great characters, but if the art is kind of so, it can take away from the book a bit. But this is a case where the art not just really gives you that great horror visual, but really elevates it at the same time. So you've got these historical, pieces to it, and where Rodney takes the story, and we're still 17, 18 issues in, and he's still going. Now we're starting to get spinoffs. I mean, if you're a vampire guy, David, I know Keefe started reading it. I mean, this is a can't miss book.
Okay.
So I liked it. I've read the first 2 volumes, and I just missed my list because I basically went with more completed stories. I assume like once it's done, once I read the whole thing, there's a good chance to be on there. But I was like, all right, let me at least. There's enough books that I've read start to finish that I wanted to put on there instead. But it was number 5 on Friar's list and number 5 on Doc's list, and it's number 8
So
on
good.
ours. Number 7, we're going with Nailbiter. Written by Joshua Williamson and Mike Henderson. It's a 30-issue run that was written between 2014 and 2017 from Image Comics. I know Davey's talked about it on DORK before, And it's the series centers around the fictional town of Buckaroo, Oregon, which has produced 16 of the United States' worst serial killers, dubbed the Buckaroo Butchers. Its most recent creation is Edward Charles Warren, otherwise known as Nailbiter, because he chews off his victims' nails and part of their flesh. By the series start, Warren has been caught by the FBI and Agent Charles Carroll, and Carroll has since gone missing, leaving it up to his friend and NSA agent Nicholas Finch to search for him. It's awesome. And I fully admit, I know it's kind of weird to be interested in serial killers, but there are a lot of people like me that are just looking at all these Netflix documentaries and all these podcasts that are out there. But this sort of is right up your alley if that's what you're looking for. It just kind of highlights all the serial killers have like a corny nickname. Yep. They all have like a calling card. And it's 30 issues, but it is a quick read. It's available on Hoopla right now, and you can get I think they split up into 3 books of 10 issues each. I have not read Nailbiter Returns. There's like a sequel to this.
Yep.
But this one I liked very, very much. It was number 5 on my list. Davey had it at number 9 on his. Doc had it at number 7 on his, not on Friar's list.
Had not read it yet.
This is one of if you're into Mindhunter, Silence of the Lambs, plus horror movies, this is for you.
And there's great comedy in here too, right? There's some moments of levity, and Nailbiter Returns. I was very good. I wasn't as good as the original run, but I think it was only 10 issues, 10, 11 issues.
Okay,
it was real short, but just as good. It pretty much just kind of picks up right where the first one left off, and it is. I mean, it's just as crackers, but what a great premise, this book is.
Yeah, I love it, and very likable characters in there as well. People to root for pretty easily. All right, Doc, for number 6.
So number 6, I went. We have Red Fork, and this was a book very, very high on my list. And when Nick gave me this book to read, this is one of those books where I couldn't put it down. And even though it was like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and I was absolutely mortified when I finished, it was just that good. So this was written by Alex Packnadel. Artist Nil Vendrell, colorist Gila Brusco, and the letterer is Ryan Ferrer. So quick synopsis, not so quick. Returning to Red Fork, West Virginia, with a laundry list of sins to make up for, ex-con Noah McGlade finds his coal mining hometown blighted by opioid abuse, economic decline, and a family that wants nothing more to do with him. Tragedy seems to follow on Noah's heels, as no sooner does he step foot in his home, his younger brother is trapped in a mining collapse. But when a mysterious wildcat miner named Gallo Glass not only saves his brother, but sets off to restore his town to its former glory, he puts a revitalized town people on a collision course with Amcor, a giant who's an energy giant whose relationship with Red Fork runs deeper than commerce. So, like on the surface, it just sort of seems like you're reading a book about a small Midwestern coal town, but what the horror that is found within those coal mines is just, it is something else. And I think what makes a good such a great horror story for me is that, you've got your supernatural, demonic, elements to it. The art is, it's vicious when it needs to be, but it's also very relatable. You could picture a small Midwestern coal, mining town, rife with opioid addiction and, poverty. Like that is a very real thing going on right now. I'm sure we know people who, are dealing with opioid addiction or things like that. So like, there's that relatable element to, a horror story that I think just can resonate a little bit more. It can really impact you a little bit more. And it's been close to a year since I've read this, and I still think about it. And just, the emotional, arc that these characters go through. And again, another instance where the art is really, vicious and gives you those strong horror vibes. This is a book that when you read it, like you think about for a little bit afterwards. You're like, holy smokes, that was heavy. What the hell did I just read? And I think I just shit my pants.
This was part of the third wave for TKO Studios, and there were a couple other books in it. I was very excited for this, but Joe, for this, those 3 books, but Joe was on this one from the jump. He said, this is going to be the best one. And it absolutely was the best one of the bunch. It's one of the best TKO books we've gotten so far.
Are we just going to gloss over the fact that Joe just said he shit his pants?
Shit his pants.
Yeah.
No one's going to talk about that, right?
He does it all the
I mean,
time.
I didn't literally pull a John Anderson, but you know,
Thought about it. It was close. Yeah, Doc, you said you had it high on your list. You had it number 1
yeah.
on your list. Friar had it number 7. I haven't read it yet, but I'm definitely going to dive in. I'll try to read it this month.
For
Also,
those,
I've not read it.
for those trying to get their hands on this one, it's tough to get at your local comic shop. You're more than likely going to have to order it through TKO Studios directly. And if you do that, I highly recommend picking up Sarah as well by Garth Ennis. That was one of my favorite books from there.
I was reading to the artist of this. He did a comic called Shirtless Bear Fighter. I'm going to read that.
Yeah.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds pretty awesome to me.
I like party.
Let's go to number 5 on our list of top 10 horror comics. For Friar's got this one.
So we're going to go with another indie company, AWA Studios. We got Hotel. That's with 2 L's. This is by John Lees and Dalibor Talajic. So we've only gotten 1 arc so far. The second arc is coming in December, on December 1st. 4 issues, so it's a really easy thing for you guys to consume. And what's so interesting about this series is it's like an anthology series where, the first, second, and third issues, you can kind of just read those and you'd be fine. But then the fourth one the fourth one, you'd have to have read some of the previous stuff. However, throughout all of this series, you're seeing stuff tied together in a way where, like, if you read it all, you're going to appreciate it even more. So you won't find it on any map. But if you happen to be driving down Route 66 late at night, you're truly desperate for shelter, sanctuary, or secrecy, you might see a battered sign on the side of the road. The Perriott Courts Hotel, where many check in, but few check out.
Ooh.
This scared the shit out of me, and there was a lot of jarring images, and this is another book that Joe talked about on TLDR. I don't know if it was your first AWA book, but I like, this is such a, some ways, it's an easy read. Like, you're going to get through that shit fast, but at the same time, it's just like, yeah, you might want to have the lights on while you read this shit.
Yeah, because
I saw a film. As I recall, it was a horror film.
Yep.
because I was reading Ice Cream Man at the time, which is an anthology series. Each book is, an individual story, and some are, very horror-like, some are just kind of meta, and it's a good but sort of weird series, and I guess it kind of ties, it ties together somehow. But I had mentioned I was reading this, and so someone said go read Hotel. And so I'm reading it, and again, the imagery is off the walls. And the first 3 books, as Nick said, you read them, you think they're just individual stories, and then when you get to that last book, and it all comes together, it's just like,
it's crazy. So I just picked it up, and so you could see.
Nice bookmark.
Look at that bookmark there. See, team player.
Fuck yeah.
And so the reason for the double L on Hotel is if the O and the T are out, and it's all lit up, it says hell.
It's a passage to hell. Yes.
So I've actually only read the first issue so far because I've been reading and I've been backed up on stuff. So I started today. I read the first issue, and it's awesome. It might be the most messed up thing on the whole list.
What did you think of that little demon baby?
Pretty messed up.
Hey, Davey, can I just ask you a question? Are we the only ones that have proper bowel movement? Because Keith's saying how he's backed up. Joe's shitting his pants over here. It's just
I think I'm okay. I'm 2-3 a day sometimes.
Okay, so we're on the same page.
I'm good.
Okay.
That can't possibly be good for you.
No, it's good. And it's like clockwork.
A good firm poop.
Hey,
What
do you eat?
I get up in the morning and smell coffee, and I'm like, all right, here we go.
Hey, sometimes that happens to me too. It's weird.
Yeah. Well,
It's like clockwork.
Anyways,
stuff. Number 4 on the list. Let's go to Davey.
Let's go to this one. Whoo boy. This is Scott Snyder and Jock Witches. Why? This one, so it's this nondescript town. It starts off, a horrifying beginning scene with a mother and her son. And I won't spoil it if you haven't seen it, but it's a cool take on what a witch actually is. I mean, clearly it takes place in some sort of like New England town. They don't say it's Salem.
No, it's Litchfield, New Hampshire.
It's that's what. Yeah. How could I forget that?
It's New Hampshire. Come on, man.
It's New Hampshire. So a girl named Sailor has had this troubled past, and there's an incident with her and this girl named Annie. And all of a sudden these witches get involved, which are these humanoid spider-like creatures that like live in trees, who like eat kids. And it's just between Snyder's writing and Jock's artwork, this thing is, we talk nightmare fuel. Like you will see some of these images in your nightmare. It is just a really, really cool. I don't want to say the word because if I hate it when people say the word, but I'm not going to say it. So the story goes somewhere and it's really cool. What happens kind of at the end and how these witches are like coming after people. Like the mechanism they use there is pretty awesome. So I know I'm being very cryptic, but I really want people to read this story and kind of.
It's a very easy one to binge too, because it's only 6 issues, and Jock's art. Yeah, you can't say enough about him. I mean, he's done this. Him and Scott are doing Book of Evil, which is coming out, I think, middle of next year. He's what he told us. So we gotta wait a while for that. But he said that shit's really fucked up when we talked to him today. And then what's the other one? Oh, he did what's the Batman Who Laughs? I know you didn't like that series, Keith, but his artwork on that shit.
Jock, I love too. I'm with you. Yeah, it's great. And you know what's funny? I believe to show you sort of where we're all coming from here, Witches, which comes in at number 4, is the only unanimous selection on the list. It's the only book that was on all 4 of our top 10s.
I mean, for me right now, my favorite current comic writer and artist on the same project. I mean, that's a selling point enough for me. I love Jock's artwork, and Scott Snyder to me is the best. In this genre, Scott Snyder is probably the best one out there.
And I hadn't read this book up until a few weeks ago, until we were told we were going to be doing this. I was like, well, I should read this book because I know the other guys like it so much. And I initially had it much higher on my list. And I think part of that was recency bias because I was fresh off of reading it. And then I'm like, no, wait, I got to flip it with this other book. And I'll talk about that, in a few moments. But this was, I mean, it's something else because Jock's art it's unique. And it's different than I think any other art.
It's jarring. His shit, it's like jarring, but also it's like where Greg Capullo is like heavy metal, like Jock can be like screamo. It seems like at times. That's the feeling I get from him.
And you know what? Yeah. It kind of gives me that like scary stories to tell in the the dark vibe. Like I forget the guy, Alan Schwartz. I forget the name of the guy who did the art in those books, but. Yeah, my God, it has like that vibe to it. Which
it does.
I'm a sucker for.
Yeah. All right, coming at number 3 on the list. It's funny because we have a whole bunch of these limited series. We just mentioned how Witches has 6 issues. Hotel, at least the first volume that's out, is very limited. We're going the other direction here at number 3. The Walking Dead, 193 issues. It was written obviously by Robert Kirkman. And it started in 2003. It didn't end until 2019. And even then, it caught a lot of people by surprise. They didn't know if it was going to go. Were they trying to get to 200 issues? Were they trying to get past that? And Kirkman decided that this was the place to stop. It won the Eisner in 2007 and 2010. And, it's not 193 amazing issues. But when Walking Dead is at its best, to me, it's some of my favorite comic book writing of any genre. I loved it. I started with the TV show, but then I turned to the comic and then read up and caught up and then surpassed where the book or where the show was. I love it. And I think what it does is, and it's clearly, I mean, with the zombies and everything, it's clearly horror, but this book, more than maybe any other book, it's the best of kind of leaving you with one page where like you get to the very last spot and then you're in for something as soon as you turn the page, and it cuts to just like one giant photo of like a character that you love, like getting killed or like something crazy happening with like one giant word and like a whole thing. They crush it on that. And it's better than the show. And the show had a few really, really, really good seasons in there too. But I highly recommend it. I know it's a lot. So, but at least start it. Like at least jump in at the beginning if you haven't read it and see if you like it. And it's different than the book or the show too, where there might be certain things that you see one character do and it's the same thing happens, but it happens to a different character. So they sort of do that a lot too. So sort of keeping you guessing. But I love it. This was actually number 1 on my list. And let's see, it was number 2 on Friar's list. So Friar, I know you like it a lot too.
Yeah, look, the thing about comics and why I actually have grown to appreciate the medium a little bit more than I do necessarily a show and sometimes a movie is it kind of is the happy medium between the two when it comes to tempo. With movies, sometimes you feel like, oh, I wish I could have gotten more, unless it's fucking 2.5 hours long. It's anything but Endgame. And then like with shows, sometimes it's like, okay, especially with The Walking Dead, it's like, all right, let's get this shit going. Like we could have killed this person off, a while ago. And I feel like that's where comics, like you have a limited amount of space where you can do stuff, but also you can kind of jump around from one panel to the next, where a lot of time can transpire just between one panel to the other, never mind one page to the next. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where the Walking Dead comic has the advantage over the actual show. And the other thing is, I think it's important for us to let the people know, if they're going to go and read this, and if you liked the show, there is an important character who's featured on the show very prominently, who's not in the comics, who's created for the show. And it's as someone who did the same thing as you, Rich, went back and read it after watching the show, it's very disappointing to find that out. So I mean, we should tell people who it is, right?
Oh, yeah, you could say it. Yeah,
it's Daryl. For those who don't know, I mean, pretty much the best character in the show.
Yeah,
he's not even in the comic. So
right.
Yeah, and I haven't read this yet, and because I remember when the show came out, I was just kind of getting back into comics, so I clearly hadn't read it then. And at 190 something issues, it just seems too daunting to want to pick up and get it.
So I caught it at the right time, where I believe the first compendium or whatever was out, and so I was able to buy that huge thing and rip through that, and then be like, okay. But it was like an absolute page turner, like it really was. And then I think, similar to the show, they had a couple of volumes by the end where you're like, all right, what are we really doing here? Like, it seems like we're just kind of running in place. And then they actually kind of came to a conclusion. And I'm really curious to see what the show does. And that's why I got back in on the show, actually. It was kind of funny how that worked. Like the TV show brought me to the book, but then the book ended up bringing me back to the TV show.
Yeah, that's how that works.
As I kept reading it, because it was going on for so long. It's kind of,
yeah, and for those, like, this is all black and white too, for those who don't know. And if they're now redoing it all in color, so you can go and catch up to where they're at in the color in black and white, and then go to color if you want to. So if you want to do the monthly instead of just binging it all at once, which I don't know why you wouldn't do that.
I would say one of the main things for me is a lot of the villains are done better in the book. So even like Rick and like Michonne and some of them are good in both. Like the governor is a lot better here. Negan's a lot better here. And I love Jeffrey Dean Morgan. I'm just saying, like, it's easier to do it in comics than it is.
I just largely think it's better in comics because, like, you're getting what the creator completely envisioned for the character. You're just going to lose stuff from the actor a little bit. And actually, they ended up doing some pro stuff, I think, for The Walking Dead too. Like there's like a governor thing.
I read the whole governor book, and that was really boring. And I was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm like,
that's what I heard.
That's how into The Walking Dead I was. I'm like, I'll read this book. I'll read a book without pictures.
It's tough without pictures, man. I'll tell you.
It was pretty dull. Like there was one kind of twist, which I guess was like maybe the selling point. Or be like, see, like it was worth reading for this one thing that you could have just told me like happened. But
so lazy.
All right, let's go to number 2 on the list and back to Doc.
So this is going to kind of spin off Davey's book, Witches. So coming at number 2 is The Autumnal, written by Daniel Kraus, artist Chris Sheehan, colorist Jason Wordy, and the letterer was Jim Campbell. And so I flip-flopped Witches and The Autumnal on my list last minute because, after talking with Nick, I was like, it started coming back to me a little bit more. And the first thing when I started reading Witches, I said, this book has an autumnal vibe to it. They're very similar stories. So following the death of her estranged mother, Kat Somerville, and her daughter, Sybil, flee to a difficult life in Chicago for the quaint and possibly pernicious town of Comfort Notch, New Hampshire. So again,
New Hampshire books. My
God,
God,
NH representing Granite State. And so like right away you kind of get those vibes, and the town of Comfort Notch almost has that Stephen King kind of feel to it. Like when you read a Stephen King book or watch a movie, like, he sets his books there. And so very similar to Witches in the sense that there's a lot of sort of like nature at play here, in this book, but a little bit more so in, The Autumnal, as the name, would suggest. And why I think I like this book a little bit better than Witches is, while Witches had a lot more action, at times, like the art was a little bit more, vicious, and, the story and the characters were great. Like I felt like in Witches, like the ending was a little predictable. Not that like, oh, I called it way back when, but I kind of saw where it was going, and even though it's a nice little, twist at the end there, like I kind of saw it coming a little bit. Whereas in The Autumnal, you've got this story of, this daughter, this mother and daughter moving back to the town that she grew up in, because her mother had passed away, left her this house, and she had a very difficult relationship with her mother. And as that unfolds, you learn more about the town and the mystery. And there's some weird shit going on. People are obsessed with don't touch the fucking leaves, don't play in the leaves, and you don't know why. And then as you get through the series, this great mystery unfolds. You've got these badass characters, and then you find out how it ends, and you're like, what the fuck? I didn't see that coming. And the character arc for the main protagonist, Kat Somerville, just like, it's gut-wrenching at the end. So like, this book, like, it did everything for me that a good horror book should do. It told a great story, it had great characters, it scared the shit out of me, and it was just like, it brought all these emotions out of me. At the end, you're just like, oh, and not to be like, as a parent, but like, if you've got kids and you read this story, like the shit that happens at the end, you're like, oh man. And so like, for me, this is why I had to like flip flop this and Witches, because it just had that extra juice in it that made this just a little bit better book for me.
And I loved the main character too. Like, she was so good. The mom in this, and she was awesome. And I just read this because I got both of your guys' lists, and it was number 3 on Friars, and then Doc moved it up to number 2. And I just so happened to be at Newbury Comics, and it was like they had like a display of like horror books, obviously, for October, and it was there. I'm like, all right, well, I gotta buy this, obviously, and I ripped through it in a day. I thought it was awesome.
So good thing you were at Newbury when you got it, because I got a little bit of information for you guys. This is on Screen Rant right now. The headline: "The Autumnal is a comic so terrifying, Amazon won't market it." In the subhead, the blurb, whatever. Earlier this week, this is mid-September, Vault Comics released The Autumnal in trade, but the cover is too scary for Amazon, which is refusing to market the book. So for those who don't know, it's from Vault. And the one thing I just want to add,
I'm looking at the cover right now, and that's no, thank you.
It's pretty fucked up. So to add off of that with what Joe was saying, like, the ending is like, oh shit, at the end for sure. It's a very good ending, don't get me wrong. But there's something that happens, and I think maybe the last issue, the second last issue, just before the ending. And it's like, that right there is like the difference. As much as I love Witches, don't get me wrong, that's the difference right there between the two books, or it's the biggest difference, where I'm just like, oh fuck, really? Like, you're gonna go there. You're gonna, like, I was very much bought into it, and it's just, I thought this is an outstanding book.
And the build up to that moment too was it was paced perfectly. Like I said, like, it doesn't have the action that Witches has. Like, Witches has, like, it's got those moments, like you'd equate them to jump scares in a movie, right? Where Autumnal doesn't have many of those, but just the story, the way it's strung together, and then the way it's just perfect crescendo, and you say, oh.
Yeah, and 8 issues is a really nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, you could tell stories, like, you're not rushing it, but you're also not like kind of stretching it. It's a pretty good job. Before we get to number 1 on our list, I think the best way to do honorable mentions is I have everybody's list in front of me. So what I'll do is I'll start with Davey, and I'll go 1 through 10 on his, and then the ones that we haven't discussed, you can kind of hit on. Number 1 on Davey's list is our number 1, so we'll save that. Number 2, Davey, you had The Crow.
The Crow. So this is the first, I'm not kidding, this is the first horror graphic novel I read as a kid. Once the movie came out, I was like 12 or 13, and I just became like fascinated with this movie. From the movie itself to the soundtrack, I loved everything about this movie. So someone told me, like, oh, did you know it was a comic book too? And I went to Newbury Comics at the time and found it and picked it up and read it. And it was just like, the artwork, the story, the violence, like, everything about this was awesome. And this was one of the first, it was the first graphic novel I ever read, and one of the first independent comics. I had no idea. I thought everything was superheroes. I thought everything was Marvel, DC. And then someone was like, no, you should read The Crow. And I did. And like, to say that, like, it didn't change my life, but my life definitely went on a different path after that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is a really interesting point you bring up, because there is a time in our lives where you realize that it's not just Batman and X-Men. Like, growing up, everything was either Batman, like, it's either DC Universe and it's the Justice League, or everything is X-Men and Avengers. And then you read something like The Walking Dead, or you read The Crow, or you read something, you're like, oh, these are also comic books. Got it.
Yes. So like the very first like independent comic book that I ever got my hands on Really, was this. I mean, if you count Ninja Turtles, which was technically an independent comic, I
Right.
read those.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this was one of the first.
That's a cool
Yeah,
one.
Awesome
for
shit.
me, it was Spawn. That was the first indie book that
Good
came
one.
out. You know, with
Yeah.
Spawn. Like, holy shit! You look at that cover. I got it hanging up on my wall. Just McFarlane just burst onto the scene with that. Like,
So good.
wait a second, that's not Wolverine. You know, that's not spandex. That's fucked up.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
I don't know what my first indie book was, but Spawn I fucking love. So yeah, I'm right there with you.
Yeah. Davey, number 3 on your list is one that you had brought up as a pick of the pod one time.
Yep.
I've never read it. I bet these guys haven't either. Did you hear what Eddie Gein done?
So this book, one of my favorite comic artists and writers is a guy named Eric Powell who wrote The Goon. He has another book called Hillbilly, which is really good. He kind of I would have put The Goon on my list. There are zombies and voodoo and but it's kind of like pulp kind of thing. It's got like the why I oughta, you know what I mean?
Gotcha.
Like kind of vibe to it.
Yeah.
But this book, I just read it, and it's basically Eric Powell's telling of the story of Ed Gein, who is not the first serial killer in America, because who is that guy? H.H. Holmes or something like that?
Yeah, H.H.
Oh,
Holmes
yeah.
actually is also from New Hampshire.
Right.
H.H. Holmes, but he murdered people in a hotel. I want to say in
Chicago.
Yep,
Chicago.
Devil in the White City. If you've ever read that
Boom.
book,
That's
Yeah.
it. But
So-
Ed Gein is the one that I think most people would associate with it because he inspired Texas Chainsaw Massacre and
Right.
Silence of the Lambs, and like he inspired all of those guys.
So it's essentially a comic retelling of his life and what he did. So if you guys are into that, and again, check out Eric Powell. He's a guy that I'm sure if you guys wanted to get him on, he would be. If you read The Goon or read anything like that, he'd be more than happy to talk to you.
so this
He's
is
cool
fun.
shit.
That's
So-
funny actually, because I remember when you talked about on Dork, and the first thing I did was I looked it up. When does it come out? And I even think I sent Friar a note, and Friar goes, "This guy's not big time enough for us to talk to him." But I actually thought about like this would be like a cool. This would actually be maybe a cool person to talk to, you know. And so it's
I don't
definitely a
believe
book
that.
that's on my queue.
Yeah.
He
so-
reminds me of Wes Burho. Like he looks like Wes Burho.
Oh Jesus!
Eric
Okay.
Powell. So
Wait
he's
a
not as
minute.
big, but like he looks like him.
Can we just take a second to say that Joe's throwing me under the fucking bus here, and he still hasn't even read the goddamn book? Get the fuck out of here.
It is Q, Friar. He says
Yeah,
it's Q.
it's queued up. It's
But I really,
it's
I
like an
really
IOU.
like I really like Powell's art. I think it's really cool. So
Mhm.
definitely check that out.
Yeah, it looked like an awesome book.
All right, Davey had 30 Days of Night at number 4, which we already discussed. At number 5, Hellboy.
Yeah, this is one that I see. The reason it was low on my list is I'm not sure which one to pick. I can't just pick like a whole. I mean, I was gonna pick like a whole series, but Hellboy goes up and down, like The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Hellboy in Hell is really good. Mike Mignola is awesome. If
The
you
art
read
is
it,
really fucked up on this.
Sorry?
The art is very
Yeah.
weird in like the perfect way, and that's where I think they fucked up with this last movie. I felt like with the last movie, I understand a lot of people had issues with it, but I felt like for the people who like the comics, they tried to do what they do in the comics with like the visuals and everything, where it's kind of weird, but it's like that doesn't translate well to the big screen. You got to do kind of what they did with Perlman.
And I would, it's a, he's kind of like a horror Frank Miller. It's like horror Sin City in a way. If you're thinking about the art, I mean, that's how I would best describe it.
Mhm.
But Hellboy, I mean, that series is really, really good. So
Yeah. So the one you had at number 6, it wasn't on our list, and I didn't put it on mine just because I didn't read the whole thing. It was so dense, but it deserves a mention for sure. And you mentioned Frank Miller, but Alan Moore's From Hell.
and this is, I don't want to say slog.
It's a long book about Jack the Ripper. Obviously, they did a movie. They did the Johnny Depp movie about it. But yeah, pick this. First of all, it's almost as long as like the entire Walking Dead series.
It weighs
ton.
about 20 pounds
Yeah.
if you pick up the book.
You can buy it. They have it in like all the different. You go to Barnes and Noble and find From Hell, and you need like help carrying it out.
it is dense. Just like anything Alan Moore writes, it's something that it's gonna be a lot of words.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of explanation that kind of goes into in the Johnny Depp Heather Graham vehicle From Hell.
She was good in it. It was fine.
Hot off being Roller Girl. She was in Boogie Nights.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a movie that doesn't really do it justice. And of course, Alan Moore wanted nothing to do with it and
Hates everything.
hates everything and didn't want his name put on it, and they didn't. But it was not to ruin the. You find out who Jack the Ripper is. It's a guy who's brought in as a special kind of like, almost like not like a Constantine, but he's definitely like a psychic detective who gets brought in to kind of find out who who Jack the Ripper is. And you find out, and it's actually a fucking pretty cool story.
So a lot of it, like it's very historical fiction because it's all like the real women who died. It's all like real stuff. Now, again, the real Jack the Ripper, like that's the part where they sort of took a stab at it because we still don't know who the real Jack the Ripper is. Stab at it. Yep.
Yeah, yep.
Oh wow.
Davey had Witches at number 7, which we talked about, and then at number 8, I thought this was interesting because this is a book that we all love, but only you considered it horror, and I'm really not going to object to it. I just didn't put it on there. But you went with Preacher at number 8.
So this is it. I mean, there is this like, does hell constitute horror, or does the like demons and things like that? Like, where does Constantine? City of Demons is 100% horror.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah.
And we're all huge fans of Garth Ennis and Preacher, and there was enough supernatural there that made it a little bit horror. Now think of a show like, what's that show with the Supernatural? Like, is that a horror show?
Yeah, probably.
Is Grimm a horror show? You know what I mean? So like there's that gray area of what horror and fantasy kind of and sci-fi kind of blur each other's lines sometimes.
Yeah, there's like dark fantasy.
Perfectly.
Yeah, it has dark fantasy. I didn't view it as horror. It's definitely jarring. There's a lot of fucked up shit in this. There's no doubt about that. I mean, but like the fucked up shit isn't just like scary, like, nightmare stuff. It's like, dude's fucking a chicken out here. Like, like there's legitimately.
Nazis, like disfigured Nazis and like all the shit. Like it goes off
which
the
could
rails
haunt your
really
dreams
quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I also think just Preacher and like, so we just did a dink on Midnight Mass, but I think like any kind of religious kind of vibe to it can easily pivot right into horror also.
Midnight Mass was so good.
Midnight Mass is crazy. That was a slow burn, but it was great.
And so many monologues in that thing in there. But
my wife was watching it and I walked in and I'm like, wow, this is like a soliloquy. Like this guy's going off.
It's a lot of acting. It's a lot of
it was Matt Saracen. Matt Saracen was like the middle of this like 20-minute diatribe. I'm like,
I can't really memorize their lines. I'd be like who couldn't be in that movie is Brendan Fraser or Keanu Reeves.
Didn't you take like a monologue? You took like an acting class in college?
I took 2 acting classes and I got A- in both.
Wow, look at you.
Wow, resident thespian.
Pretty good. We did a David Mamet scene. I did a David Mamet scene. I was yelling at a guy.
Yes, mostly David Mamet plays with just someone yelling at somebody.
I was yelling at a guy. I was the guy that was pretty aggressive. That was a fun one. And then I would still say we had to do a scene with one other person, and it had to be without, you couldn't say a word, but you had to play a song and you had to act out a scene. And so my friend and I, we were partners together. We did, what's the fucking Nirvana song? Like, where do bad folks go when they die?
Like a Fire.
It's actually a Meat Puppets song.
Oh, it is. Yeah. It's not Nirvana?
They covered it. But it's
okay, so we did the Nirvana version of that song, and we played Jenga until my buddy fucked up the Jenga piece. He pulled out a gun, blew his brains out, and I cried over his body as the song was playing, like screaming "No, no" as I was banging onto his body. Pretty good.
Wow.
Anyway,
that's
number 10. That was a horror scene, actually, is what we did. Number 10 on Davey's list, which was also on my list, Sandman or The Sandman by Neil Gaiman.
And again, you're gonna have to read with this one. I fucking love Neil Gaiman stuff.
He's incredible.
I do.
Amazing.
And I think I would have Sandman. I can't wait for this to come on Netflix. The trailer looked really good and looked the story they're gonna tell is the how Dream like comes to Earth and like has to deal with all these people and it's really fucking good. Like
I love it. Really I'm a fan. It was on my list. So real quick, my list: The Walking Dead was number 1. What our number 1 is going to be was number 2 on my list. I went with Batman Arkham Asylum at number 3.
See, this is one I considered as well.
Yeah.
Because when we did our Batman one, it like just missed my top 10 Batman list. But that's the one I was talking about at the beginning, where the art is just so crazy. Yeah. It has so many horror vibes to me. So I went with that at 3. I went Sandman 4, Nailbiter 5, Witches 6, 30 Days of Night 7, the Autumnal at 8, and Joe, I went Gideon Falls at number 9.
Right. You know, it's like when it's family movie night, and like, oh, let's watch this movie. It's really good, and then no one fucking likes it. And you're just sitting there awkwardly.
No, I liked it. It was a story that caught me. I liked sort of like the mystery story, like with it. Obviously, horror all around it, and like a lot of really scary images. But just the whole time, as the reader, you're trying to figure out how the fuck all this connects and where is this going. I thought they did a good job telling that story, so I like that one. And then a new one, definitely recency bias, might not be on my list in another month from now, but I read The Dollhouse Family, which is a DC Black Label book. So it's like a one-shot, 5-6 issues, boom, boom. It's on Hoopla if you guys want to read it. And Dollhouse Family was really it's in like the Hill House. It's not written by Joe Hill, but it's in the Hill House imprint. So that was my number 10. Docs, he went Red Fork number 1, the Autumnal number 2, Hotel, Gideon Falls 4, Philadelphia, Witches, Nailbiter. Number 8, one we haven't talked about yet, Harrow County.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love Cullen Bunn. I mean, when it comes to horror, he's one of the first guys I think of. And what's great about this is, again, I just, when it comes, for me, horror, a lot of it is visual, right? And you know, the art, I can't remember the artist's name, but it's almost I think it's watercolor, and just some of the imagery and that sack of skin that's always sort of following, right, the main character around, is that alone, you know, fucked me up. And then
there's a skin sack.
Yeah, sack of skin.
Yeah, old sack of skin that's like, you know, sentient. You know, it's just kind of, you know, moving around, and but like it's again, it's all about story, it's all about character, and then when you add the visual aspect of it. So I absolutely love this book.
Number 9, you went with a book that was actually on my initial top 10, and then because I read extra stuff just for this episode, I got bumped out. But Lock and Key.
Yeah, this was
Joe Hill. Yeah.
I mean, I love this book. The TV show stinks, and they're coming out with another season. Woof. But just, you know, again, the art, the story, it's original. You know, it's Joe Hill, which is Stephen King's son. So just like absolute awesome fantasy horror book all around.
And then number 10 on your list, I had the same thing as Philadelphia, where I didn't put it on there just because it's not done and I haven't read it all. But Something is Killing the Children at number 10.
Yeah, this is probably my favorite, or one of my favorite books of, you know, the past year plus. James Tynion, he's tremendous at writing suspense. He's, you know, I put him right up there with Scott Snyder in terms of like crafting a story. I mean, I think Tynion was Snyder's student, right. So he's just so good at creating suspense. Again, you know, the art, you know, you get these awesome scenes with, you know, monsters just biting children's heads off. It's fucked up. But it's absolutely fantastic. And I believe at 20 issues, like the main run is over now. They're going to be doing some side, you know, some spin-offs and stuff like that. So really good.
And then Friar went City of Demons 1, The Walking Dead 2, The Autumnal 3, Hotel 4, Philadelphia 5, and then one we haven't talked about, number 6, Crossed. This is a Garth Ennis joint. Now, they did stuff after the first 10 issues, but the first 10 issues are Garth Ennis. I'm going to talk about this. Look, the Doctober has been kind of weird for us because of the guests and everything like that and what we've been doing, but I'm going to do a horror book in November. I have something else planned for next week, but I'm going to talk about this at length. This shit is all kinds of fucked up. And like, there's a lot of deaths that are like, oh, fuck. But like, the thing is, like, the imagery is just like, this is some of the most rancid shit I have ever seen in my entire life.
Holy shit.
It's so fucked up. Just to give you all like this should be the selling point, just like Autumnal. Okay. When I went to the time capsule over in Seekonk where I buy my comics, this is on their horror list, right? And you have a bunch of different stuff. I picked up The Red Mother there, which was just on my, just missed my list. This was in a bag, and it said adults only. It is the only book that says that. This is fucked up shit, man.
So I'm looking at,
what are you looking at?
I'm not going to show. I'll describe it to you. So I'm looking at a grown man
Should I
naked,
share it on the screen or no?
2 children, with
No, yeah, wait.
suggested
Stop it
nude,
right there.
eating a woman.
Yeah, it's fucking bad, dude. And I haven't even apparently. So I've only read the first 10 issues, and I will have read the second and third volume by the time we do the show. I was told that the third, like the second one's good, the third one's like the best of the first 3 at least, and it's like all kinds of fucked up. And the first one, I'm telling you guys, first 10 just Ennis alone is like holy shit.
And again, the covers of these things, you're like, good Lord.
Oh, let me show you. I'll show you guys one cover real quick. This is actually for the third one. I don't know
Back it up.
you can, yeah, the glare. Sorry, but
Yeah.
the second one's a little bit better, but I can't find it. But it's like that old family, like the husband and wife with the pitchfork, and they got like. I'm not selling it well at that point, but the rest of it, it's just fucked up. Trust me.
Wow. All right.
Wow.
Hey,
Jesus.
one other one that I wanted to mention.
I'm telling you guys, it's
I was
crazy
gonna
shit.
say about
It
that.
looks crazy.
I took
don't
a
wanna talk
shower
about
after
it.
I read every
I don't
fucking issue.
want to talk about it anymore. It looks like a fucking Guar album cover. Anyway, there's one other one that I wanted to. My boy, Brian Azzarello. If you guys haven't, so like 30 Days of Night, he has a 4-volume set called Moonshine,
Yes.
Oh,
which
Yes.
is a story set during the time of Prohibition, and the bootleggers are werewolves.
Yeah.
So Moonshine has that double meaning.
I like it. I like it very much.
So
Yeah, I have the first volume of that. I got to read that shit. I think I'm going to do it on the show at some point for sure.
it's
All
pretty
right,
good.
and then Friar went with Red Fork at 7. Something is Killing the Children 8, Witches 9, and then his number 10 is our number 1. So Davey, without further ado,
So this one, I can't believe it wasn't on all of our lists.
Doc did not have it on there.
Doc
Yeah,
did not have it
only
on
because
there.
I haven't read it. Only because I haven't read it.
Well,
Oh,
Doc,
okay.
you need to read as
Yes.
soon as we hang up this call.
It's
Scott
on-
Snyder's American
Download it.
Vampire.
Ready to go.
It's
It
so
is
good.
so good. Now, not only is it good, a great vampire story, which is multi-layered. The characters are great. The artwork is great. Stephen King is involved with, I think, the first 2 volumes.
Yeah, he writes like an intro and then he writes something else, I think. But yeah.
I think
And
it's the
so
first
basically, it's this idea that vampires have existed for thousands of years, right? And it's funny that like each area of the world, the vampires are a little different, which then leads to these American vampires. And the 2 main characters are there's 3 main characters, and they're all American vampires. What's her name?
Pearl.
Pearl Jones.
Sorry, I Pearl being the main character, and it's kind of starts with her story being in like the golden age of Hollywood, and just the predatory nature of that. 7 years before the Harvey Weinstein story broke, Scott Snyder's writing about like this allegory about the predatory nature of Hollywood with
Yeah,
like
she
this
was an
young
actress.
struggling actress,
yeah.
and she gets attacked by these vampires, and the second vampire we meet who saves her by turning her into a vampire
Mhm.
is Skinner Sweet, which is probably one of my favorite comic book characters ever.
He used to
he's
be a
got a-
piece of shit.
Yeah,
He used to be a real piece of shit.
Slick
But
back hair and
he is-
everything.
And
He's really
it's
good.
such a cool story because he's such because Pearl is desperately trying to hang on to her humanity, and Skinner is just embracing this whole
Yeah.
vampire power thing. So what if you had like Billy the Kid turned into a vampire?
Mm.
Yeah.
Now
Well, who
that's
looks
Skinner
kinda-
Sweet.
I think he looks a little bit like Steven Dorff, a little bit.
He does. He
Yeah.
does. And to see Skinner in different eras of America,
Yeah, it's awesome.
and to see the vampires operate in different, because it starts in the 1800s and goes to like, I think the last one was 76.
Yeah, the recent one is 76.
The most
So
I haven't read any of the recent one. I've read everything but that. But
I
that-
believe that trade's coming out in December. I haven't caught up on it, but I plan on doing something on TLDR for that
it's
for you.
10 issues, right? Like it's a
Yeah.
it's a good amount of stuff. So.
And
Mhm.
it's I think it's one of the most like perfectly written vampire stories.
Yeah.
Because it's drawn against like this idea of America and how America was founded by like incredible violence,
Mhm.
and the vampires kind of are holding up a mirror to that.
Mhm.
And it was kind of awesome to
Yeah,
read.
so the
Again, like
first-
historical fiction and things like that. I mean, it's great.
Yeah, and Raphael Albuquerque does the art, and it's very unique. It's very good. And so the first 5 issues, they sort of broke the story into 2 parts, and Snyder wrote one part of it, Stephen King wrote the other, and then from there, Snyder wrote the rest of it. And it's funny because I think the first thing I read from Snyder ever, and we talked about it during the Batman episode, was the Black Mirror.
Mhm.
And then from there, I think I read all of his Batman stuff. And then I was like, oh, well, this guy's just great. Like, let me read this other. So then that's when I read like Witches. I read all of American Vampire. He had a book called Severed, which was like decent. These ones, all that we talked about, are all better, but Severed's good. I just read The Wake, the one that Friar talked about.
Oh, that was fucking awesome.
That was pretty good. I mean, really, everything the guy writes is good, and he has a good balance between writing superhero stuff and then horror stuff. But then this book sort of combines the two in a way, right? Because they're not your traditional heroes, but like they find stuff for them to do. And then a guy like Skinner Sweet, where he's kind of balancing the two a lot, and he's just a horrible guy. Yeah, sneaky good guy. No, he's a horrible guy. It's like
Oh, he's going to be helpful here. No, he's a real piece of shit.
Still.
He's doing sloppy steaks.
Yeah.
I had every I tried really hard to squeeze the first 5 issues of this book in before we came on tonight. I just came up and I couldn't do it. But I mean, this is one that I know I should have read, just like Sandman. Like I should have read, by now. And because I mean, I celebrate Snyder's entire catalog, and how this would escape me, that's beyond me. But I mean, it just sounds fantastic. He is such a good writer. The way that Snyder, he layers his story. And like from issue to issue, like he'll start off with something, and then the way he circles back to it, and the way he just sort of paces and plots his stories is unlike any other.
And I would like to say, in terms of perfect casting, I think if I'm a casting director, and I think the movie rights have been bought for this.
Almost all of Scott Snyder's books have been
bought.
I mean, dude, he did Undiscovered Country before the first issue came out, and that was already optioned for, I think, a movie is what it was in the end.
Yes. Wow. My perfect casting for Skinner Sweet would be Ben Foster.
Oh, Ben Foster would be good. So not Steven Dorff?
Not Steven Dorff. It would be Ben
That's
Foster.
A crime.
Hell or High Water. He played Angel in X-Men.
I know.
Was Alpha Dog. He was kind of badass in.
He played the guy in the Thomas Jane Punisher that got like his lip ring ripped out.
Oh, he was also in 30 Days of Night. He's the guy from Louisiana who comes to Alaska to warn them.
How about this? American Vampire, you can get the omnibus. It came out on Halloween 2018. It's 984 pages.
Jesus.
Yeah, but you know what? The thing about this is it reads really quickly for the most part. I had this so low on my list because this is when I talk about how, like, yeah, it's definitely a horror book and it's really, really fucking good. But when we talk about like a horror book, like I kind of care most about is this scare me shitless? And it doesn't. Like it's really good. Don't get me wrong; it's an easy read, but I don't get that vibe necessarily from this. Maybe that says more about me than anything else. I don't know.
It could also be like, I mean, there's vampire fatigue right now. I mean, like
there's a lot of that, but I also think there's a difference, and it's all up to you because I know you guys were like, so what do you mean by it? I'm like, it's whatever you want horror comic to be, because some might view, and I looked at this the same way I looked at movies. My list of 10 scariest movies or 10 best horror movies are different lists.
Yes.
Yep.
Like Scream doesn't really scare me anymore, or maybe it never did, but like I love it. It's my number one.
Did it ever scare? I didn't think that scared anybody, really.
I bet
Scream scared you, Joe? Scream?
No.
Oh, there's some good scares in Scream. Well,
I think I would say at one point I was startled, but not scared.
I jump at fireworks.
I jumped. I remember streaming a video game that you weren't even playing that you couldn't watch.
Yeah, that was fucked up with the babies crying. Right?
That was traumatic for everybody. All right, that's an awesome list. So just to recap it real quick, number 10 was City of Demons. Number 9, 30 Days of Night. Number 8, Philadelphia. Number 7, Nailbiter. Number 6, Red Fork. Number 5, Hotel, 2 L's. Number 4, Witches. Number 3, The Walking Dead. Number 2, The Autumnal. And number 1, American Vampire. That's a pretty good list.
Damn good list.
Very happy.
Fellas, where can people listen to the podcast, watch the podcast, check out your interview with Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo, and everything else you do?
So you can follow TLDR on Twitter at TLDR_pod, and you can find us on all platforms, Instagram, Now we're on the YouTube. We're not on RedTube yet, but we're working on it.
We're on TikTok.
We're on TikTok, TLDR_podcast, Instagram. So follow us there. We'll have our Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo interview dropping tomorrow, which we had an absolute blast with those guys.
If you don't want to wait for the audio to drop, make sure you guys go watch that. And of course, you can find Joe on Twitter and Twitch at Backcracker. We also do all our episodes on Joe's Twitch as well. You can find me at Fry_Guy1. And also, I do want to say that the only mainline issue that we're doing this month for TLDR, because we had the omnibus earlier in the month, we have the solicitation at the end of the month. I am going to be talking about another horror book that only had 4 issues, and it's fucking terrifying. But this is going to be more of an ongoing thing, it seems like, from Aftershock. Bunny Mask. This shit gave me goosebumps every goddamn issue, and I could put it on the list, but I need to see this, like, at least one more arc from this to comfortably put it there. But it absolutely was up for consideration.
Where have I heard? I've heard about this. Like, I feel like we talked to somebody who recommended it.
Look at the cover art. The cover.
I've tweeted it out, Davey.
I saw it from these guys on either Twitter or Instagram, and I saw just the cover, and I was like, "Holy!"
Dude, every fucking issue, it's like, goosebumps. Yeah, for real.
I gotta read this.
That character. I'll talk about it more next week, but I wanted to plug that too.
It's not like Donnie Darko, is it? It's not like the fucking Donnie Darko.
You'll have to listen next week.
All right, I'll check it out. I'll definitely check that out. As for us, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube at Dork Podcast. You can subscribe and like and do everything you can on all those. Dorktober rolls on. Halloween Kills next week. We'll be talking about that, and we'll probably do a dink on DC Fandom as well, which I'm sure there'll be some comic book news for you guys to hammer out too.
I'm gonna try and live tweet that as much as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Davey, any final thoughts?
No, man.
Okay.